Fear. Yeah. PTSD is a fear-based issue. It is about the fears that we've had, the experiences we've lived through, and unfortunately, it creates more fear as we go along. Initially, there's the triggers and the things that we were afraid of, and then it turns into being afraid of PTSD. You go from having nightmares to being afraid to go to sleep. You go from having triggers to being afraid you're going to trigger. And then a lot of people say there's no recovery, you just have to get medicated, you just have to not act like a fool, that it'll be with you your whole life. So you're afraid of that too. How do you set your life up so that if you trigger, you're not going to hurt someone or damage someone? The suicide rates are really, really high in a lot of places. And there's no way of getting an exact number. But a lot of that suicide is fear. Fear that things will never change. Fear that things will never get better. Fear that this is the way life will always be. So I saw a monk once where he was up on top of a table and his assistant came in and she said, "What are you doing? You're afraid of heights." And he said there was a snake, or I think it was some kind of something. And he said that his fear of heights was lower than his fear of snakes. There's like a scale. Where's your fear? So when you're dealing with the fears of the trauma that you experienced, the fears of whether or not you're going to get better, maybe make a list and go through your emotions and where exactly is your fear list. And start from the bottom, not the top. Start with overcoming some of the fears that are reasonable and tangible and real, that can help give you confidence to tackle the next one. There's natural, biological, physical responses to things that may seem pretty stupid. So I'm going to cover stuff more in depth, but one of my issues was rhubarb. Sorry, I got a hair. And that may seem really stupid to a lot of people, but when I was a child and I was starving, there was rhubarb planted near the house, and I was told that it was food. And so just as a little girl, I would dig up the rhubarb from the ground and eat it. Rhubarb is bad raw, and I've been told it's kind of toxic too, but when you're really, really hungry, you'll eat just about anything you can get your hands on. So I would eat that rhubarb and I would hide. So I'm hiding, I'm afraid somebody else is going to find me and they're going to take the food away. I'm getting sick because rhubarb's a little toxic, but I had to eat something. And you go a few days without food. I know a lot of people don't eat because they're dieting, or they don't eat because of, there's a really big difference between not eating when there's food available and not knowing when you're going to get food again. So getting over rhubarb, it wasn't a fear. I didn't feel like it was going to attack me per se. But if I was in a grocery store, or actually, to be honest, I volunteer at food banks whenever I can because nobody should be hungry. And sometimes rhubarb would come down the chain of things to give away, and it would make me sick. It would make me nauseous, like physically reacting. Why would anybody eat that? Why would anybody do that on purpose? And it like hurt me inside to even give it to somebody else, because nobody should be forced to eat rhubarb. That was something I had to get over, especially volunteering at food banks. Rhubarb is not harmful. People put it in pies, they put it in cakes, they put it in all kinds of stuff. There are a lot of people in this world that love rhubarb. So the first thing I had to address was, what was it that was bothering me? And it's not the rhubarb itself. Again, I've never been assaulted by rhubarb. It's never happened. But it was being hungry, and that fear of being hungry again. And when I saw rhubarb, it reminded me of being that little girl hiding behind a bush, digging rhubarb up out of the ground and eating it raw. So when you address your fears, start there. Start with something tangible. Start with something that you know is not a real threat, and work there. And then from there, you can move on to a bigger fear or a bigger problem. just kind of a Fear 101. A lot of people are afraid of things that they never had an experience with. Plane travel is very, very safe. You don't hear about the hundreds of thousands of planes that land every day safely. You hear about the one wreck that happens every once in a while, and people are afraid to travel. So start there. Is this a realistic fear? Is this really a problem? And what's the best way of overcoming that? With rhubarb, it was actually just a process of, I think, watching other people eat rhubarb, to be honest. I still don't do it by choice, but other people eat it in front of me and they don't get sick and they don't throw up and life still goes on. And so I don't get nauseous anymore. I still don't want it. I'm not going to eat it, but I'm okay with that. That's still an accomplishment as far as I'm concerned. So work on your fears. You might need to list them, because sometimes we're not actually aware of what we're afraid of. And making the list helps too, because it helps remind you of why you're afraid of it. And then once you figure out why, you can start addressing it.